First Contact Protocol. The Galactic Peacekeeping Station, Harmony, lived up to its name in every way except one. It was anything but harmonious today. Commander Vrital's crystalline appendages shimmered with anxiety as she watched the approaching human transport through the station's quantum viewport. Her assistant, a gaseous entity named Zeph, swirled in agitated patterns beside her. "The human's vital signs are stable, Commander," Zeph reported, his voice whistling through carefully modulated air currents. "Though their heart rate would be considered cardiac arrest for most species." "That's normal for them," Vrital replied, her crystalline form catching the light of nearby stars. "Humans operate at speeds that would kill most sentient beings. Constant electrical impulses, rapid cellular regeneration, and a metabolism that practically runs on rocket fuel." The transport ship, elegant in its simplicity, docked with a precision that surprised both aliens. Humans had a reputation for brute force approaches, yet this landing showed remarkable finesse. The airlock cycled, pressure equalizing with a soft hiss that sent vibrations through Vrital's crystalline body. Sarah Chen stepped onto Harmony Station with the careful movements of someone used to operating in varying gravity. Her dark eyes scanned the reception area with military precision, taking in details that most would miss. At 1.7 meters tall, she was shorter than many of the station's inhabitants, but something about her bearing made her seem larger. "Lieutenant Chen, welcome to Harmony Station," Vrital chimed, her crystalline form shifting to a formal configuration. "I am Commander Vrital, your liaison officer." Sarah smiled, careful not to show teeth. She'd studied alien cultural protocols extensively. "Thank you, Commander. Your station is impressive." She kept her voice modulated and calm, though her heart raced with excitement. "First human in the Galactic Peacekeeping Force. No pressure." Zeph drifted closer, his gaseous form analyzing Sarah's chemical signature. "Fascinating. Your body is producing various compounds. Is that adrenaline? Are you in danger?" "Just excited," Sarah explained, suppressing a laugh at the way Zeph bobbed backward. "Humans produce these chemicals naturally. It helps us focus. Your species operates in a constant state of chemical enhancement." Vrital's crystal matrix flickered with concern. "How do you maintain stability?" "We adapt," Sarah replied simply. It was something she'd learned during training. Sometimes the less said about human capabilities, the better. No need to mention that what most species considered performance-enhancing drugs were basically Tuesday morning coffee for humans. The tour of Harmony Station revealed a marvel of cooperative engineering. Gravity plates adjusted automatically for different species' needs. Atmospheric processors created perfect environments for everything from methane breathers to vacuum-dwelling crystallines. And everywhere, beings from across the galaxy worked together in what seemed like perfect harmony. Until they reached the training center. "This is where we maintain our peacekeeping skills," Vrital explained, leading Sarah into a massive chamber. Each section is designed for different species capabilities. Sarah watched as a group of energy beings practiced what looked like combat maneuvers, their forms weaving through obstacle courses made of pure force fields. In another area, massive creatures that seemed to be made of living stone engaged in slow-motion sparring. "Where will I train?" Sarah asked, trying to hide her eagerness. Vrital's crystal structure dimmed slightly. "We haven't quite figured that out yet. Your species' capabilities are challenging to accommodate." "Challenging?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're too fragile for the high-gravity sections," Zeph explained, swirling anxiously. "But too dense for the low-gravity areas. Too slow for the energy-being courses, but too fast for the silicon-based life-form training. And then there's the temperature issue," Vrital added. "Most of our combat training involves environmental extremes that would kill me," Sarah suggested helpfully. "Precisely," Zeph exclaimed, then realized how that sounded. "I mean, perhaps we could design something specific for human limitations." Sarah was about to respond when a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. A delegation of tall, elegant beings had entered the training center. Their bodies seemed to be made of flowing liquid metal, catching and reflecting light in mesmerizing patterns. The Voltarian diplomatic corps, Vrital whispered, her crystal structure rigidifying in formal respect. They're here for the annual peacekeeping protocols review. Whatever you do, don't. But Sarah was already moving forward, her military training kicking in as she noticed one of the Voltarians struggling with a malfunctioning gravity compensator. Without thinking, she reached out to stabilize the device. The entire training center went silent. You dare touch a Voltarian without permission? The tallest of the diplomatic corps stepped forward, his liquid metal form rippling with what Sarah recognized as anger. Do you know what the penalty is for such an offense? Sarah stood her ground, keeping her voice steady. I apologize if I've violated any protocols. I saw a potential safety issue and acted on instinct. The Voltarian's form shifted, becoming more angular, more threatening. Safety? You? A creature from a death world presuming to understand safety? His laugh sounded like mercury dropping on steel. Perhaps you need a lesson in proper protocol. Vrital moved forward, her crystal form pulsing with diplomatic phrases, but the Voltarian raised a hand, stopping her. No, Commander. This requires more than words. I, Ambassador Vexcor of the Voltarian Consortium, invoke the right of ritual combat. Let us see if this human is truly worthy of joining the peacekeeping force. The training center erupted in a chaos of different atmospheric gases being expelled in shock. Zeph actually condensed partially into liquid form. And Vrital's crystal structure developed several new facets that Sarah suspected weren't supposed to be there. But Sarah Chen, first human peacekeeper in the galaxy, just smiled. Because there was one thing none of them knew about humans, they did their best work when everything seemed impossible. I accept, she said, and the words echoed through the suddenly very quiet station. What are the terms? The ambassador's liquid metal form rippled with what might have been satisfaction or surprise, Sarah couldn't quite tell. 3 solar rotations from now, in this very chamber. You may use any natural abilities your species possesses. I will do the same. Just to be clear, Sarah said, maintaining her diplomatic tone, natural abilities include all evolutionary adaptations. Everything our bodies can naturally do. Of course, Vexcor replied dismissively. Though I doubt whatever abilities a soft-bodied creature from a barely habitable world could possess would make much difference. Sarah's smile widened slightly. Excellent. Then I look forward to our cultural exchange. As the Voltarian delegation swept out of the training center, Vrital's crystal structure vibrated with distress. Do you have any idea what you've just agreed to? Voltarians can reshape their entire body into weapons. They can conduct enough electricity to power this station. They can. Commander, Sarah interrupted gently, did you know that humans are persistence predators? What does that mean? Zeph asked, his gaseous form swirling in confusion. It means, Sarah replied, watching the retreating forms of the Voltarian delegation, that we never evolved to be the strongest, or the fastest, or the most dangerous. We evolved to be the ones who never, ever give up. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous thing of all. The first betting pools opened before she even finished speaking. The challenge. Word of the upcoming duel spread through Harmony Station faster than a quantum entanglement cascade. Within hours, every species capable of mathematical probability was calculating the odds of survival for the station's first human peacekeeper. Most of their predictions ended in scenarios involving spectacular molecular disassembly. Sarah Chen spent the first day after the challenge doing something that confused every alien observer assigned to monitor her: she slept. For 8 standard hours, she simply lay motionless in her quarters, occasionally making small unconscious movements that sent the medical sensors into a frenzy. Is this some form of meditation? asked Dr. KZZT, the station's xenobiologist, their bioluminescent tentacles pulsing with curiosity as they reviewed the data. Some kind of pre-combat trance? No, Zeph replied, having appointed himself as the station's unofficial human expert. Humans require periodic unconsciousness to function. They call it sleep and become severely impaired without it. Fascinating. KZZT's tentacles brightened. They voluntarily enter a state of complete vulnerability? On a regular basis? How did they survive as a species? Before Zeph could respond, Sarah stirred and opened her eyes, causing several of the more nervous observers to retreat behind safety barriers. She stretched, a motion that made KZZT frantically record notes about human skeletal flexibility. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, noting but not commenting on the crowd of scientific observers. "Anyone know where I can get a coffee?" The station's culinary AI spent 20 minutes trying to understand why a member of a sentient species would willingly consume a bitter neurotoxin for pleasure. It finally produced something that was technically coffee, though the mug came with 3 warning labels and required a hazmat certification to handle. Sarah took her potentially lethal beverage to the training center, where she found Commander Vrital waiting. The crystalline officer's usual shimmer was dulled with worry. "Lieutenant Chen, the station council has been discussing your situation," Vrital began, her tone carefully modulated. "They believe it would be prudent to arrange your transfer before the duel. There would be no shame in." "Commander," Sarah interrupted gently, "have you ever wondered why humans made it to the stars?" Vrital's crystal structure shifted in confusion. "Your species developed quantum drive technology approximately 50 of your years ago, though our records indicate it was somewhat crude by galactic standards." "That's how we got here," Sarah corrected, taking a sip of her warning-labeled coffee. "But not why. We made it to the stars because every time someone told us something was impossible, we took it as a challenge. Every time we found a barrier, we looked for a way around it, or through it, or we just kept hitting it until it broke." She stood and walked to the center of the training area, studying the various obstacle courses and combat zones. "The Voltarians think they know what they're dealing with. They've seen our biological data, our strength ratings, our speed tests. But they're missing something fundamental about humans." "And what's that?" Zeph asked, having arrived in time to hear her speech. Sarah smiled. "We cheat." The next 2 days became a crash course in human ingenuity for the station's inhabitants. Sarah requested access to the station's technical specifications, environmental controls, and material science databases. She spent hours in the physics lab, running simulations that made the AI scratch its virtual head in confusion. Ambassador Vexcor and his delegation occasionally passed by the training center, their liquid metal forms rippling with amusement as they watched Sarah going through what appeared to be basic calisthenics. They didn't notice her careful attention to the way their bodies moved, the subtle shifts in their surface tension, the way they interacted with different electromagnetic fields. "Your human continues to waste time on primitive physical exercises," one of the junior Voltarian diplomats commented to Vrital. "Perhaps she doesn't understand the futility of her situation." Vrital's crystal structure vibrated with diplomatic neutrality, but she had begun to notice something. Every time someone suggested Sarah withdraw, every dismissive comment from the Voltarians, every pessimistic prediction from the station's betting pools, they all seemed to make the human more focused, more determined. On the evening before the duel, Sarah visited the station's archive, reviewing historical footage of Voltarian combat techniques. KZZT found her there, surrounded by holographic displays. "I've completed my analysis of your biological capabilities compared to a Voltarian," the xenobiologist announced, their tentacles drooping slightly. "I regret to inform you that in terms of raw physical power, speed, and durability, you are significantly outmatched." "Thank you, Doctor," Sarah replied, not looking away from the displays. "But did you ever wonder why humans classify movies about impossible victories as based on a true story? I don't understand. It's because impossible victories are kind of our specialty, Sarah explained, pausing a particular piece of footage. We're not stronger, or faster, or tougher than most species. But we are very, very good at finding ways to win anyway. She stood, stretching again in that way that fascinated KZZT's scientific sensibilities. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to make some final preparations. Oh, and doctor. You might want to place your bet soon. I have a feeling the odds are about to change. As Sarah left the archive, KZZT noticed something odd about the footage she'd been reviewing. It wasn't combat training or military tactics. It was a technical manual about Voltarian physiology and their species' unique relationship with electromagnetic fields. The xenobiologist's tentacles brightened with sudden understanding. They immediately headed to the betting pools. In her quarters, Sarah made one final check of her equipment for tomorrow, which consisted of nothing more than her standard-issue Peacekeeper uniform. She'd declined all offers of weapons or protective gear, much to the horror of her alien colleagues. Remember, she muttered to herself, recalling her combat instructor's words back on Earth, the best weapon is the one your opponent doesn't know you have. As she prepared for another round of voluntary unconsciousness, the station's night cycle shifted into place, and the betting pools reached record levels. Tomorrow, either history would be made, or, well, Sarah preferred to focus on the first option. After all, humanity had a reputation to uphold. Hidden strengths. The day of the duel arrived with all the subtlety of a quantum singularity. Harmony Station's massive central training arena had been modified to accommodate spectators from every known species classification. Methane breathers floated in sealed observation bubbles while crystalline entities clustered in resonance chambers. Even a few energy beings hovered near the ceiling, their forms crackling with anticipation. Ambassador Vexcor arrived first, his liquid metal form gleaming under the arena's lights. He moved to the center of the combat zone, his surface rippling with patterns that the station's cultural experts recognized as traditional Voltarian battle signs. Several members of his diplomatic corps arranged themselves in a ceremonial pattern around him. "Where is the human?" he asked, his voice carrying the metallic resonance of his species. Perhaps she has finally realized the futility of this challenge. As if in answer, the arena's main doors slid open. Sarah Chin walked in, wearing nothing but her standard Peacekeeper uniform. No armor. No weapons. Not even shoes. The collective gasp from the audience manifested in at least 12 different atmospheric compositions. Lieutenant Chen, Commander Vrital hurried over, her crystalline form vibrating with concern. "There's still time to reconsider. The Voltarians are going to get a lesson in human innovation," Sarah finished with a smile. She rolled her shoulders, a casual gesture that nonetheless caused several nearby observers to flinch. "Trust me, Commander. I know exactly what I'm doing." Dr. KZZT, monitoring from a safe distance, noticed something odd about Sarah's movements. They were different from her usual patterns. More fluid, more calculated. The xenobiologist's tentacles writhed with sudden understanding. "She's been studying Voltarian biomechanics," they whispered to Zeph. "Look at how she moves, she's mimicking their natural flow patterns." The station's AI announced the start of the duel with a multilingual chime. Sarah and Vexcor faced each other across the arena's center circle. "The terms remain as agreed," Vexcor stated, his form already beginning to shift and flow into a more combat-oriented configuration. "Natural abilities only. No external weapons. Combat continues until submission or incapacitation." His surface rippled with what might have been amusement. "I will try to leave enough of you intact for your species to identify." Sarah's response was to do something that confused every sensor in the arena. She yawned. "Sorry," she said, noting the ripple of confusion that passed through Vexcor's form. "Bit tired. Shall we begin?" The ambassador's attack was blindingly fast. His liquid metal form surged forward, reshaping itself into a dozen razor-sharp tendrils. In the observation areas, several species covered their sensory organs, not wanting to witness what they assumed would be a very short and very messy end to humanity's first peacekeeper. But Sarah wasn't there. She had dropped and rolled, not away from the attack, but toward it, passing under the deadly tendrils with millimeters to spare. Coming up inside Vexcor's guard, she pressed her palm flat against his surface, a touch that seemed absurdly gentle given the circumstances. "Interesting," she said, as if she were conducting a scientific experiment rather than fighting for her life. "Your surface tension is exactly what I calculated it would be." Vexcor recoiled, his form rippling with confusion and something that might have been the first traces of concern. No opponent had ever touched him so casually in combat. More importantly, no opponent had ever smiled while doing so. "What game are you playing, human?" he demanded, his form consolidating into a more defensive configuration. "Oh, I'm not playing," Sarah replied, beginning to move in a slow circle. Her bare feet made soft padding sounds on the arena floor. "I'm conducting a practical demonstration in physics. Would you like to know what I learned while reviewing your species' biological data?" She didn't wait for an answer. Voltarians maintain their form through a complex interaction of electromagnetic fields and surface tension. It's really quite fascinating. Your liquid metal bodies are held together by forces that would tear most other species apart. Vexcor launched another attack, his form splitting into multiple striking appendages. Sarah dodged each one with movements that seemed almost choreographed, as if she were dancing rather than fighting. "The thing is," she continued, not even slightly out of breath, "those electromagnetic fields have to remain stable for you to maintain coherent form. And there's something else about humans that most species find surprising." She grinned. "We generate our own electromagnetic fields." In the observation area, Dr. KZZT's tentacles went rigid with sudden realization. "The nervous system," they exclaimed. "Human bioelectric fields, they're not just random noise." Sarah had spent the last 3 days learning to consciously control her body's natural electrical field, something human martial artists had been doing for centuries without fully understanding the science behind it. Now, every time she touched Vexcor's liquid metal form, she created localized disruptions in his electromagnetic cohesion. The ambassador noticed too late what was happening. Each light touch, each seemingly ineffective strike, was creating tiny instabilities in his form. His attacks became less coordinated, his movements less fluid. "Impossible," he growled, his voice distorting as he struggled to maintain coherence. "You are nothing but a primitive organism from a death world." "That's where you made your mistake," Sarah replied, continuing her steady circular movement. "You assumed that because we evolved on a death world, we must be simple brutes. But surviving on Earth didn't just make us strong." She tapped his surface again, sending another carefully calibrated electromagnetic pulse through his form. "It made us clever." The audience watched in stunned silence as the mighty Voltarian ambassador's liquid metal form began to lose cohesion. The more he tried to attack, the more Sarah's precisely calculated touches disrupted his electromagnetic field. "An interesting fact about human history," Sarah continued, her voice casual as she danced through another series of devastating light touches. "We used to hunt animals much larger and stronger than ourselves by simply following them until they collapsed from exhaustion. We called it persistence hunting. It's not very flashy, but it's remarkably effective." Vexcor tried to respond, but his voice came out as a distorted gurgle. His once elegant form was now barely maintaining humanoid shape, ripples and distortions running through his liquid metal body. "Would you like to submit?" Sarah asked politely. "Or should we continue this physics lesson?" The ambassador's response was to try one final, desperate attack. His form surged upward, attempting to engulf her completely. Sarah stood her ground, raised both hands, and released the electromagnetic pulse she'd been building up throughout the entire fight. Vexcor's coherence failed completely. His liquid metal form collapsed into a puddle, unable to maintain structure against the carefully calibrated disruption of his electromagnetic field. The puddle quickly reformed into a roughly humanoid shape, but it was clear to everyone watching that the ambassador was barely able to hold himself together. "I submit," he managed, his voice distorted but clear enough to be official. The arena erupted in chaos. Species that were physically capable of doing so cheered. Those that weren't simply emitted various forms of excited radiation. In the betting pools, fortunes were being made and lost. Sarah knelt beside the struggling ambassador. "Don't worry," she said softly. "The effect is temporary. Your electromagnetic field will stabilize in about 10 minutes. I made sure to calculate the exact frequency needed to disrupt your cohesion without causing any permanent damage." She smiled. "After all, we're supposed to be peacekeepers." As medical teams rushed forward, though none seemed quite sure what medical attention a destabilized Voltarian required, Commander Vrital's crystal structure vibrated with a mixture of amazement and concern. "You knew," she said to Sarah. "From the moment he challenged you, you knew how to defeat him." "Not exactly," Sarah replied, finally allowing herself to look as tired as she felt. "I had a theory. But humans are good at turning theories into victories. It's kind of our thing." Paradigm shift. The next few cycles on Harmony Station were anything but harmonious. Sarah's victory over Ambassador Vexcor had shattered more than just Voltarian dignity, it had broken every preconception about human capabilities in galactic society. In the station's primary medical bay, Dr. KZZT's tentacles hadn't stopped writhing with excitement for hours as they reviewed the combat footage. "Do you realize what this means?" they asked anyone who would listen. "The human didn't just win, she revolutionized our understanding of interspecies combat." Sarah, sitting patiently through yet another series of medical scans, tried to suppress her amusement. "Doctor, I just applied basic physics. Any human with a decent understanding of electromagnetic fields could have done the same. That's precisely my point." KZZT's bioluminescence pulsed rapidly. "Your species doesn't just adapt to problems, you actively seek out vulnerabilities in systems that should be far beyond your comprehension. You turned your own biological limitations into advantages." The medical bay's doors whispered open, admitting Commander Vrital. Her crystalline form was vibrating at frequencies that Sarah had learned to recognize as extreme stress. "Lieutenant Chen," the commander began, her tone carefully modulated, "we have a situation. The Voltarian Diplomatic Corps has requested your presence." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Requested or demanded?" "Both." "Neither. It's complicated." Vrital's crystal structure refracted light in patterns that suggested deep confusion. "They're not angry, exactly. They're curious." The walk to the diplomatic quarter was interesting. Species that had previously given Sarah a wide berth now studied her with intense interest. Some even attempted to take readings of her electromagnetic field, though their sensors seemed confused by the results. They found Ambassador Vexcor and his delegation in their private conference chamber. The ambassador's liquid metal form had fully stabilized, though Sarah noticed subtle changes in his surface patterns, more angular, less flowing. He had adapted his form to be more resistant to electromagnetic disruption. "Lieutenant Chen," Vexcor's voice carried none of its previous condescension. "We have spent the last several cycles analyzing our encounter. There are questions that must be addressed." Sarah nodded, taking the offered seat. "I assume you want to know how I developed the technique?" "No." The ambassador's form shifted thoughtfully. "We want to know why you chose that specific method. Our analysis suggests you had at least 7 other viable strategies for victory." The room went silent. Even Vrital's crystalline chiming stopped. 7, the commander managed finally. "At minimum," Vexcor confirmed. "The human could have exploited the arena's environmental controls to create a temperature differential that would have compromised our cohesion. She could have utilized the station's artificial gravity to affect our surface tension. She could have. I chose the method that would cause the least permanent damage, Sarah interrupted quietly. And the one that would make the clearest point. Which was? That humans aren't just strong, or clever, or adaptable. We're all of those things, but more importantly, we understand the responsibility that comes with them. She met the ambassador's gaze steadily. I could have permanently destroyed your electromagnetic field matrix. Instead, I chose to demonstrate that humans can be both powerful and restrained. The liquid metal surface of every Voltarian in the room rippled with what Sarah recognized as deep thought. Finally, Vexcor spoke again. We have submitted a formal request to the Galactic Council. The Voltarian Consortium wishes to establish a permanent exchange program with Earth's military and scientific institutions. Now it was Sarah's turn to be surprised. You want to work with us? After you demonstrated exactly why humans are both fascinating and terrifying, Vexcor completed. Your species evolved on a planet that should have killed you. Instead, you turned its challenges into advantages. You developed science and technology not through careful, methodical progress like most species, but through a chaotic process of trial and error that somehow produces brilliant results. His form shifted, creating patterns that Sarah recognized as formal respect. More importantly, you showed wisdom in victory. Any species can learn to fight. Few learn when not to. Commander Vrital's crystal structure was emitting frequencies that suggested she might shatter from sheer stress. Are you saying that this entire incident, from the challenge to the duel, was a test? Originally, no, Vexcor admitted. It began as pride and prejudice. It became a lesson, though not the one we expected to learn. He turned back to Sarah. There is an old Voltarian saying, the most dangerous opponent is not the one who can destroy you, but the one who chooses not to. Sarah smiled. We have a similar saying on Earth, with great power comes great responsibility. Indeed. The ambassador's form rippled with what might have been amusement. Though I must ask, did you really need to let me think I was winning for the first part of our duel? Psychological warfare, Sarah replied cheerfully. Also an Earth specialty. As they discussed the details of the proposed exchange program, news of the meeting spread through the station. Betting pools, which had just finished settling accounts from the duel, immediately opened new odds on how many more galactic protocols humans would revolutionize before the end of the cycle. In his private laboratory, Dr. KZZT was already preparing a paper titled Adaptive Problem Solving in Deathworld Species, a case study in human innovation. The xenobiologist's tentacles hadn't stopped writhing with excitement. They really don't see it, do they? Zeph commented, watching the proceedings with his usual gaseous insight. See what? Vrital asked. That the most remarkable thing about humans isn't their strength, or their cleverness, or even their adaptability. The gaseous entity swirled thoughtfully. It's their ability to make everyone around them question what's possible. New horizons. 3 months after what became known as the Chen incident, Harmony Station had changed in ways that went far beyond its normal evolutionary processes. The changes weren't immediately obvious. The station still functioned as the galaxy's premier peacekeeping facility, various species still went about their duties, and the artificial gravity still occasionally hiccuped near the cafeteria. But the differences were there, if you knew where to look. In the newly established Adaptive Combat Training Center, Sarah Chen stood before a mixed group of alien peacekeepers, her bare feet planted firmly on the training mat. The room's environmental controls had been modified to accommodate species from across the biological spectrum, creating a strange patchwork of atmospheric bubbles and gravity fields. The first thing you need to understand about human combat techniques, she explained, is that they're not really about fighting at all. They're about problem-solving under pressure. A Medusan observer, their crystalline tentacles glowing with curiosity, raised an appendage. But how can we apply human techniques? We don't have your electromagnetic properties or endurance capabilities. Sarah smiled. That's exactly the point. Humans don't win because we're stronger or faster. We win because we learn to use whatever advantages we have, no matter how small. She gestured to a holographic display showing various alien physiologies. Each of you has unique capabilities that humans could never match. The trick is learning to use them in ways your opponents won't expect. In his observer's bubble, Ambassador Vexcor's liquid metal form rippled with what had become recognizable as approval. The Voltarian diplomatic corps had become regular attendees at Sarah's training sessions, their presence a reminder of how quickly things could change in the galaxy. Meanwhile, in the station's primary research lab, Dr. KZZT was presenting their latest findings to an interdisciplinary team of xenobiologists. Their tentacles pulsed with excitement as they displayed complex data streams showing human problem-solving patterns. The remarkable thing isn't just their ability to adapt, the xenobiologist explained, but their tendency to actively seek out new challenges. While most species evolve to avoid danger, humans evolve to overcome it. Commander Vrital, attending the presentation remotely, chimed in with a question. But doesn't this make them inherently dangerous to galactic stability? Quite the opposite, KZZT replied. Lieutenant Chen's approach to the Voltarian duel proved something crucial. Humans don't just solve problems, they look for solutions that benefit everyone involved. They're not content with victory alone, they seek understanding. The station's betting pools, which had once focused primarily on combat outcomes, now ran complex probability matrices on which field humans would revolutionize next. Current favorites included xenobiology, zero-gravity architecture, and something called extreme tourism, that made several risk assessment AIs shut down in protest. In the station's diplomatic quarter, Sarah sat across from Vexcor, their regular strategic discussions having evolved into something approaching friendship. The ambassador's form displayed the intricate patterns that indicated deep contemplation. We've received the first reports from our exchange programs with Earth, he said. They are, not what we expected. Problems? Sarah asked, taking a sip of her still hazmat-labeled coffee. Opportunities, Vexcor corrected. Our scientists are learning to approach problems from completely new angles. Our diplomats are discovering that human unpredictability can be an asset in negotiations. And our warriors. His form rippled with what might have been embarrassment. They've become oddly fascinated with something called parkour. Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. Please tell me there's video of Voltarians doing parkour. Several thousand hours worth. It's become quite popular on what you call the internet. The ambassador's surface displayed patterns of mild concern. Though we've had to institute some safety protocols after an incident involving a liquid metal being attempting a backflip. Their conversation was interrupted by a priority alert. Commander Vrital's holographic form materialized in the room, her crystal structure vibrating with urgent frequencies. Lieutenant Chen, we've received a distress call from the Arcturian sector. A colony ship is trapped in a temporal anomaly. Standard rescue protocols are failing, and the situation is deteriorating rapidly. Sarah was already standing. Let me guess, you want someone who might come up with an unorthodox solution. The council specifically requested you, Vrital confirmed. They said, and I quote, we need someone who can think impossibly. As Sarah prepared for her next mission, she reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy had expected humans to be simple brutes from a death world. Instead, they'd found partners who could help them see problems, and solutions, from entirely new perspectives. In the station's main concourse, different species gathered around public displays showing news from Earth. Human innovations were being adapted across the galaxy, not because they were the most advanced or sophisticated, but because they approached problems from angles no one else had considered. You know what the really interesting thing is? Zeph commented to Dr. KZZT as they watched Sarah's departure. She didn't just change how the galaxy sees humans. She changed how humans see themselves. The xenobiologist's tentacles pulsed questioningly. Think about it, the gaseous entity continued. Humans always knew they were adaptable, but now they're starting to understand why. They're not just survivors of a death world, they're innovators who can help other species see possibilities they never imagined. As Sarah's ship prepared for departure, she received one final message from Commander Vrtal. Lieutenant, the Council has approved your proposal for the Interspecies Innovation Initiative. They're calling it the Human Perspective Program. Sarah smiled. The galaxy had thought they were getting a simple warrior when they accepted their first human peacekeeper. Instead, they'd gotten something far more powerful, a reminder that the most important evolutionary trait wasn't strength or speed or even intelligence. It was the ability to look at the impossible and say, let's try anyway. In the vast darkness of space, Harmony Station continued its orbit, its diverse inhabitants going about their duties. But now there was a new energy, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. Because sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't the ability to win fights, it's the ability to change minds. And humans, as the galaxy was learning, were very, very good at both.